Hello and welcome to a special broadcast here on News 9. I'm Aditya Kaul. The Indian elections are over, but there are 64 elections that are happening this year across the globe. One such election is happening in the United States. Today, joining us is someone who has been brainstorming, not today, but for last many years, to bring in the India-US ties to newer heights. Ambassador Atul Keshap, the chair and the president of the US-India Business Council. Thank you very much for joining us.
Aditya, it's a delight. Thank you for having me.
Well, let me begin with your impressions of the Indian elections. I mean, you yourself said and wrote perhaps that this was the Mahakumbh of the democracy across the world. What were your observations sitting far away in Washington, D.C., observing the elections process? Perhaps people expected a certain result. There were surprises out there. But the exercise itself and the result.
It is the Mahakumbh Mela of democracy. If you think about it, over 650 million people voted. That's incredible. Over almost 1 billion registered voters. It's a source of inspiration for all of the people who believe that democracy is the best form of government for this planet. So what India did is a source of great pride, not only for Indians, but for every freedom-loving person all around the planet. And in that regard, the voter of India, having had a peaceful, profoundly well-organized election that reflected the voice of the Indian people, really sent a strong signal about the power of human freedom and democracy. And in that regard, India has shown yet again its great leadership in world affairs.
Well, the Biden administration and the Modi government here have had an understanding. There's been a strategic partnership that New Delhi had with other governments as well, but it has been taken to new heights now. Do you feel that with the new government in power, even though this is a coalition here in New Delhi led by Prime Minister Modi, there will be a continuity and stability to the strategic partnership between DC and Delhi?
So I feel like there has been a continuity in the strategic partnership going back really to about the year 2000. So we're coming up on a quarter century of sustained and consistent effort on a bipartisan basis, both in Delhi and in Washington, to grow the partnership and to hasten our strategic, economic, and increasingly technological convergence. It's good for your country, it's good for our country, and leaders in both have decided that this is the course upon which we must remain embarked.
Well, you yourself have written extensively in the last 1 year and set a benchmark of $500 billion US trade between the two countries. How optimistic are you of this happening? How soon? And what are the pragmatic steps that both sides actually need to take in this direction?
Well, I think it's important to be ambitious. And so in talking about that $500 billion mark, I impatiently want to see US-India trade achieve it. We are currently around 200 billion. We have had impressive growth over the years, but it needs to happen much faster. And in order for that to happen, number one, the two governments have to be ambitious about trade facilitation for both Indian companies coming to America and American companies coming here. And both governments have to take steps to facilitate openness between our two societies. These can include things like a digital services agreement. They could include things like mutual standards and recognitions. There's so much that could be done between our two governments that would give business confidence to enhance investment and trade and prosperity and job creation in both directions. The truth is, your companies are doing very well in the United States. Our companies are doing very well in India, but there needs to be more volume. It's going to be good strategically for us, good strategically for you, good for our companies, good for employees, good for tax base. And so to the extent that we can really work on a few key things, one is ease and speed of doing business. The other is swift arbitration of any disputes that may come up. Level playing field, which is to say we treat Indian companies in America on par with American companies, and you treat American companies on par in India with Indian companies. And then regulatory predictability. This is very important if companies are going to make multi-billion-dollar decisions over a 10-year or 20-year period. They need to have a certain sense that the regulatory and policy framework will be durable across the term of that investment.
Well, apart from volume and the ease of doing business between these two countries, there is the defense and the technology partnership that both these countries have. Of course, the advent of artificial intelligence and specifically drones and drone agreements between these two countries. How important is that in this bilateral relationship? And do you think that technology transfer is also something that is much more on cards?
So if you go back to about that period 25 years ago when the US and India really embarked upon this path of convergence, the truth is back then we didn't trust each other. We had very serious differences of opinion about many issues around the world. And over the years, we have worked as governments and societies, private sectors, think tanks and others to overcome that trust deficit and actually to build a very strong basis of collaboration. And as the world has gotten more and more turbulent and unsteady and insecure, Washington and Delhi have come to rely on each other more and more and to trust each other more and more. And as they do that, the technology and defense cooperation becomes very important. This is why the two governments launched the Indus-X partnership, which we launched with them at the U.S. Chamber. There's the ICET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, which we launched with them at the U.S. Chamber. And there's the Innovation Handshake, which we launched on the margins of APEC with the two commerce ministers in San Francisco last year. All of these are about technology. All of these are about free societies that innovate together for their security and for the happiness of their people. So you mentioned drones. Drones are a very promising area of collaboration between the U.S. and India. There's a very big deal that is in the offing with General Atomics and the drones that the Indian military would be procuring for the defense and well-being of India. There's much more that can be done together. And this is where the two governments, I think, need to work with industry to address some of the bureaucratic rigidities, some of the bureaucratic processes, some of the things that we normally do that inhibit the growth of that technological convergence. If we can break through those barriers, I think a lot more can be achieved.
Well, we started with the Indian elections, but there is a democratic exercise underway back home as well. A lot of chatter. We had the presidential debate as well. But this is, as you said, a deeply divided and a turbulent world. We've going two wars simultaneously, the Russia-Ukraine war, more than 2 years, and now, of course, more than 9 months, the Israel and Hamas conflict. How critical is this time for this US elections as well? The kind of leadership that the US has given, and perhaps the role increasingly that DC has in these simultaneous wars, because this directly impacts trade, economics, not just with the US, but perhaps across the globe.
Well, I think any Indian would agree and understand that democracy is a messy business, and that when you are in a large and diverse nation like the United States or India, the democratic processes by which a free people determine how they will govern themselves can be unpredictable. But America, like India, is made strong by its democratic traditions, and elections are the lifeblood of democracy. So what we're going through right now is what you've already been through, which is essentially a dialogue with ourselves about the future direction of our nation. I am convinced by the wisdom of the American people, just like I'm convinced of the wisdom of the Indian voter. And I'm convinced that what comes out of our process will strengthen our country and give it increased impetus toward ensuring its leadership in world affairs. You know, we've had more than 2 centuries of peaceful, civilian-led transfers of power in the United States in a very orderly fashion. And it has resulted in our ability to lead in world affairs. Just like India's moral voice in world affairs keeps going up and up because of its strong democratic credentials. So I don't in any way view these elections and these processes as a source of weakness. Indeed, they actually make us much stronger than our adversaries. Our adversaries are almost to the, without exception, anti-democratic and in some cases totalitarian states. They will make mistakes because they don't have hundreds of millions of people participating in their leadership. They have one man or one person making these decisions. So will the United States remain relevant and I think dispositive in world affairs? Absolutely. We have no choice. And we have had a very strong track record across the 20th century and now into the 21st century of trying to reduce the amount of instability in world affairs. We've put a great deal of resources into trying to limit damage when it occurs, and you mentioned two wars that are raging right now. This is where the US and India have actually a lot that we can do together to be pillars of stability in world affairs, and it's because of our democratic standards.
Well, you speak about stability. We've seen stability in the India-US ties. We've seen perhaps shared values and shared interests on the same table in the strategic partnership. But there's also the strategic autonomy that India speaks about often. And when we speak about strategic autonomy, we speak about our relations with Russia and China. Where does US stand on this? Because Prime Minister Modi, in fact, made this surprise visit to Russia in Moscow, where he, in fact, told Putin that solutions cannot be actually found on a battlefield. Do you think that Americans understand and perhaps these relationships are very independent of each other?
Well, first of all, we also have our relations with Russia and China, such as they are. And these are nuclear weapons powers. They are P5 members. And so it's natural that every country should have some form of engagement. We have our differences with Russia and China. We have expressed those very openly. Here's what I would say. India's stature in world affairs keeps rising because India's economy is growing, and the Indian voter constantly shows that passionate adherence to democracy. When a nation like India, which is pursuing its own sovereign interests and pursuing its own national security, as any nation should, engages with countries like Russia and China, it serves as a great reminder of how a rules-based international order and peaceful arbitration of disputes is essential for the future happiness of humanity. So what you mentioned the Prime Minister's visit. You mentioned what he's reported to have said to Mr. Putin. I think that's India showing its moral leadership in world affairs. That, these kinds of conflicts that have created unnecessary human suffering resulted in economic fragility for countries all around the world, a spike in energy prices, a spike in food prices because of a war made by the choice of one man. It's great when a country like India engages and says, hey, maybe you should think this through a little bit, recalibrate.
Well, do you also feel that there would be a greater India-US partnership to challenge expansionist tendencies, both the Chinese and the Russian? The Quad comes to mind. And in fact, this year itself is the 20th year of Quad and its collaboration. Do you think Quad has been a success? And perhaps many say it has a sole objective these days to keep China under check. Is that the mission, or is it the larger collaboration between these countries?
Well, first of all, the Quad has proven to be a success. Thank you. You're quite right in that regard. I think that the collaboration between Tokyo and Canberra and Washington and Delhi intensifies and expands in ways that show that our great democracies feel comfortable with one another. I would disagree with your framing of what the Quad is all about. I think the Quad is about upholding sovereignty and democracy, not only for our own countries, but for every country in the entire Indo-Pacific. The late Prime Minister of Japan, Abe Shinzo, always talked about a free and open Indo-Pacific. Yes. And what he meant by that was that every country, big or small, should be able to chart its own destiny, make its own choices for the well-being of its people. Whether you're the Solomon Islands or Malaysia or Comoros or Madagascar, you should be free and you should have an open, self-charted future. And that means that you shouldn't be bullied by some external power. You shouldn't have your economy eroded and made brittle through a lot of bad debts. That you should be able to stand on your own 2 feet and take care of your people in the best way that you can, using the standards that India and the United States and Japan and Australia all agree with. Again, back to a rules-based international order, clear and understandable rules for commerce, freedom of navigation, peaceful arbitration of disputes, and much else besides that we cannot take for granted. And so the Quad is about ensuring that those standards are available not only for the 4 countries of the Quad, but for every country in the entire region, because there are those who are out there who would wish to erode those standards and make life much less appealing in future for some of the countries in the Indo-Pacific.
Ambassador Keshap, not as the president of the US-India Business Council, but as a career diplomat, you have seen multiple presidents in the US. You have served under multiple presidents and represented America across the globe. Do you still feel that America's image, or perhaps if I can frame it this way, that the world has looked up to the US in times of crisis? Do you think that image of a superpower still remains, or do you think that the recent few years have been challenging, especially across the globe for America?
So here's why I always have faith and optimism. Everywhere I've ever been in my entire career, if you talk to a taxi driver or a hotel clerk or just ordinary people, they are fully clued into what's happening in the United States. And it's not just our politics, it's our pop culture, it's the movies, it's music, entertainment, the companies that bring world-class services to nations all around the world. America, in many ways, is an indispensable nation in world affairs. Think about our companies and what they have done to transform the lives of people all around the world. Think about the ways that they have invested in almost every country, including in India, to generate jobs by the tens and hundreds of millions all around the world, to build prosperity and sophistication. American companies lead the world in virtually every field. American ideas lead the world. The American military safeguards the entire world. You know, the global financial system is essentially run out of the United States. I don't say these as ways of boasting. What I say is that without America, the world becomes a much more unstable, much more dangerous, much more Malthusian and Hobbesian place. And I think we should accept that while our country is going through turbulent times, very much within the constraints and framework of its democracy, we have not neglected the world. That in fact, America is constantly looking at where the threats might be to global stability. You mentioned the two wars that are going on. U.S. is deeply involved in trying to resolve and end both of them. Appreciate India's efforts as well. You look at all of the various long-term challenges, whether it's environmental challenges, pollution, energy crisis, food sustainability. You know, the people of the United States have helped ensure food stability around the world for decades. Remember Dr. Norman Borlaug? The list goes on and on. I don't think the American people are going to shrink back from world affairs. Indeed, if you look at our political discourse, a lot of it has to do with ensuring that free societies and free people can remain free, sovereign, and prosperous despite all of these challenges. And Americans do like a challenge, especially when we feel like maybe we're getting backed up into a corner. That's when we focus more than ever. So I'm not at all pessimistic. I think you've got a lot of energy in the U.S. Virtually every dimension of leadership, the American government or people are in the first rank, and that will continue, no matter what our politics do at home.
Well, Ambassador Keshap, last year was a successful foreign policy year, I would say, for New Delhi, with the G20 success that happened at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. We, of course, had the consensus document, but one thing that I want to talk about is on the sidelines, the iMac agreement that really happened, and there was a lot of chatter all across the globe between the media and the foreign policy wonks as to how this will shape up. A big connectivity project. But do you think with this war that's been shaping over the last 9 months, also the Houthi attacks, the Iranian proxy attacks that have been happening on the ships and the corridor of the Red Sea, this iMac treaty or the connectivity project is under some kind of a halt? Or do you think this is something that will be taking shape in the next few months?
Well, Aditya, you just proved my earlier point that the iMac is the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. And it is an example of the United States and India working together to show responsible leadership in shoring up a region that is really subjected to some very serious instability generated by the Iranians, generated by the Russians, generated by all of their, friends and collaborators. And so, as countries deeply invested in the Middle East, the U.S. and India are shoring it up through initiatives like iMac. I think iMac will succeed because A, it's a great idea. B, it makes a lot of sense. C, we have local partners, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel, that are deeply invested. And so you do have the Houthis, who are essentially Iranian proxies, and you do have Hamas and Hezbollah, who are all Iranian proxies, essentially trying to erode the stability of the Middle East and erode the pillars of stability in the Middle East. And then there's the US and India and our local allies in that region saying, wait, we have to uphold stability. It will work. It will take time. It's a new project, a new enterprise for us in working together. It complements very nicely our work in the Indo-Pacific to ensure the freedom and sovereignty of the Philippines and Vietnam and other important friends and partners. And I think it reflects a deepening of the Delhi-Washington global partnership to ensure happiness and prosperity for your citizens and for our citizens.
Well, Ambassador Keshap, you're in New Delhi and you've been interacting with a lot of ministers, a lot of stakeholders in this entire India-US partnership. The mere fact that you are here possibly every month in New Delhi, traveling all across from DC, tells us how much not just the USIBC, but perhaps the US government and the commerce sector, the finance sector entirely is interested in India and taking the relationship forward. But in your interactions with the stakeholders here, what are your expectations from them? For instance, Jaishankar has been very vocal over the last many years, talking about the Indian democracy and how the West needs to understand what the Indian democracy stands by. And we, of course, want good ties, better ties with them. But what is America's, perhaps expectation from the new Modi government?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. I am a retired official.
Yes.
And so I only speak for myself or for the USIBC.
Yeah.
And I would say that my personal expectation, and one of the reasons I do come here so often, is that I want to see the strongest possible relationship between the Indian people and the American people. Because if 1.8 billion democracy-loving people can get it right, then we serve as a beacon of inspiration for all the other countries, hundreds of millions, if not billions of people who do not enjoy the freedoms that we have and the prosperity that we have and are living far more miserable lives. So, as an American, and especially as a retired American diplomat, I do take it on faith that democracy is the best form of government and that it is certainly better than all the other forms of government that we have so far developed. And therefore, we should hope that it not only is enjoyed by us, but by everybody around the world, that it will make the world more peaceful, happier, more prosperous. And the world is beset with problems right now. You have China and Russia and Iran and North Korea essentially looking to challenge the established order in any way possible and in any place possible. And it's making things much more dangerous in world affairs. With that level of unpredictability, the American people and the Indian people have to stand up for what is right. And what is right is human freedom, it's openness, it's transparency, it's democracy, it's prosperity, it's innovation, it's the potential of human beings to live happy lives, peaceful lives. So getting that right is very important. And, our relationship is vast. It is multifaceted. It's across virtually every field of human endeavor. But I want to achieve the full potential. So you talked about the business relationship. Our companies are world leaders. They employ millions of people in India. They generate a tremendous amount of jobs and revenue. They're the best in the world in technology and managerial skill. I want to see more of that in India. I want to see more Indian investment into the US and more Indian-driven job creation in America. This is not a case of I win, you lose. This is a case of both of us not only winning together, but frankly, lifting the tides for everybody all around the world. Getting those details right is important. We have to be ambitious. We have to be impatient. We have to focus on the goals, including the 500 billion that you mentioned. And if we don't get it right, the risk is that the future of humanity is darker and dimmer. So this is a compelling kind of essential element of duty for me. And I hope that by engaging in these visits and having respectful and constructive dialogue with Indian partners, and also talking in the US to my colleagues there, that we can work through some of the problems that are really, in the grand scale of things, not huge problems, but will help us attain our full potential.
Well, Ambassador Keshap, from the brass tacks and the policy, I want to ask you one last question. And this is about the person and not the policy.
Right.
This is about you. And this is about your experience in New Delhi. Perhaps I could be wrong, but you're perhaps the longest serving diplomat, American diplomat in India and South Asia in different capacities over the last 30, 40 years. How has your experience been, serving in India? And what is your India Connect?
So I think a lot of people focus on the negative when they come to India, and I always focus on the positive. I think my first visit to India was when I was maybe 6 months old.
Wow.
Maybe a year. And I've been coming almost annually to India over that time. And the amount of change in this country that I've seen just in my lifetime and in my memory is utterly sweeping. You know, I tell folks back home that India might be the most dynamic society on earth, which is amazing considering how vast India is and how diverse India is. And yet India changes at light speed. You know, there's this old trope that, India is tigers and jungles and elephants and snake charmers. That image is gone. India today is a nation of financial payments done in the blink of an eye electronically. A nation that is scaling that out worldwide because it's good and it's easy and it's quick. This is an India where the Aadhaar card has unlocked so much potential for the people, where you inoculated all of your people during the pandemic in a way that was truly impressive. By developing your own vaccine at home, an India that is reaching for Mars and the moon and the stars, an India that is truly consequential in world affairs. And I think back to when I was a little boy, how isolated, how impoverished India was, how little opportunity there was, how much economic asphyxiation there was, hopelessness there was. And now I come to India that is bursting with opportunity, a country looking to become possibly one of the largest economies on earth, GDP growing by leaps and bounds, an India that is confident in its own abilities and has an incredibly ambitious vision for what it wants to be by 2047 and has the real possibility of achieving that very bold vision. And I realize I'm living, and when I come here, I am living in the India of my dreams. And those dreams are from when I was a little boy. So I'm very impressed by what's happened in India. It makes me want to pay in a lot of my own effort to try to advance this as much as possible, because it's good for the American people as well to see a great democratic nation like India not only succeed, but succeed famously.
Very nicely put there. And let's hope that this kind of dynamism that you put in here is not just here in New Delhi, but in this relationship, and it is taken to new heights. Thank you very much, Ambassador Keshap.
Thank you, Aditya. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks.